The talk you're about to hear is basically how what we've been up to in trying to help make our users, our developers' lives easier and still give them the same performant components while still meeting their business needs, their user needs, et cetera. My name is Naina Raisinghani. I'm a product manager on AMP. What that basically means is I work with our amazing engineering teams and all our contributors across AMP to make sure we're building the right thing for our users all the time. I'm also a facilitator for the UI and accessibility working group, or what we've learned over the past 2 days, the group that cracks the lamest jokes. I'm also a facilitator on the Code of Conduct working group. And if you want to reach me, I'm NanaR92 at Twitter, and I'm just NanaR on GitHub. But yeah. We spent a lot of time thinking about what AMP's mission, our vision is. And our mission is basically to provide a user-first format for the web, for all web content. That could be ads, stories, email, websites, regardless of what. We want to be driving this user first. And who is our user, right? Our users span ages, countries, different kinds of demographics, different kinds of phone access, different kinds of platform, et cetera. And we're designing. And when we're thinking about the web and we're thinking about the users, we're thinking about all of them all the time, which means performance is so important, but so is thinking about a lot of the different aspects of user experience. So like I said, our user is that person right there. It's me. Hi. And they see the web through their mobile devices, their laptops, their tablets, et cetera. But to get to them, we have to work with the people behind that mobile screen or that laptop screen, et cetera. That is the company and the developers, the marketers, the advertisers, et cetera. That's how we get to our user, to making sure our users have the best experience. And so how do we really go about building a user-first format for the web? We have a bunch of different high-level principles that we follow. The first is making sure that developers who are developing in AMP can create the best app-like consumption experience on the web, so that they don't have to keep going to these closed ecosystems like the app, and they can find the same primitives on the web in AMP as they would in an app. And how do we go about that? We keep releasing components that really help push this experience forward, and so we launch new components here. Search is such an important thing to do if you're an e-commerce business or if you're a publisher, because it helps the user find something and helps the user act on things. And these are both really important regardless of what vertical you are. And to be able to help a user do something, to be able to help a user find something, to help them fill out a form is so important to helping them make that transaction quicker. And AMP autocomplete is an example, is a component that we drove with that example in mind, helping users find things and then act on them relatively quickly. And you know what the great thing about this component is? There was an example for you to do it in a very low primitive way within AMP's existing components, such as AMP list, AMP bind, et cetera. But we saw the feedback that you were getting from it, which is that you kept going to the page that had that example, but then you were kind of deploying broken experiences. And so we upscaled that and helped you create a much better, much more cohesive example using AMP autocomplete. And the great thing about this is it's the component that keeps on giving. Now, as we work with the AMP for email teams, we're trying to make sure that stuff like that this component can be used in email as well to do stuff like powering mentions or just an autocomplete experience within an email, so that you have that entire actionable experience within the scope of your email. We also keep improving existing components, such as AMP Carousel. It's one of the components that shipped with AMP initially, and it has a lot more to offer than just being able to swipe through images, which is why we've been really taking a step back and thinking about, right, this is the API we offer for AMP Carousel currently. It doesn't work great, but how can we make it better? And that's where AMP Carousel v2 comes down. It gives you a whole lot more. It respects the current primitives you have, that is either having a homepage carousel or a product gallery, et cetera, but gives you more things as well. And we'll talk about that in a second. We also don't just think that images are these static visual indicators on a page. We see them as a lot more interactive than just that, which is why we've been working on auto lightboxing all AMP images that are on a page. And that is something you get with an AMP, that is something you get inbuilt with an AMP experience, with an AMP page. So yeah, just by having an AMP image, if it meets a certain set of criteria, which is it's not clickable or it's not in the background of something, we auto lightbox it, making sure that that image is still there, providing that visual information, but it's also accessible for people who find that small image hard to get information out of. And we're also working on something that we call blurry placeholder for AMP images. So that's basically if you're opening an AMP page from a poor network connection, or just opening a web page from a poor network connection, you see nothing. You see a loading indicator, and then all of a sudden you see an image. That can be a really jarring user experience, and developers should be doing something here. But we believe that it's not developers who can do it. We at the framework level can solve this problem, which is why we're actually switching out that loading indicator for like a much better transitionary experience. And I put the wrong GIF in there. Smart. But yeah, you could swap out those 3 dots loading indicator, or what is now the circular spinner in AMP, and it would be a much more graceful transition from nothing to a series of pixels that show you what the image is going to look like. And in the spirit of improving components we've already released, we're working on AMP sidebar. We can call it version 1, 2, or 3. I lost track. But basically making sure that AMP sidebar is responsive across desktop and mobile surfaces. So stuff like providing you an experience where your menu on a desktop page transitions to a sidebar on a mobile experience, or just providing you better experiences such as a better swipe to dismiss interaction that wasn't available with AMP sidebar before. So these are just progressive enhancements that we keep providing to components that are already released, such as carousel, sidebar, AMP image, because we believe that these components have a lot more to offer. And as we receive feedback from developers who are deploying AMP pages, we keep iteratively improving on them. The second objective that we strongly believe is that for the web to be successful, it has to be this really vibrant marketplace for publishers and advertisers as well. They should be able to see the web as a place where they can recognize revenue, where they can recognize impact, and that's the way that they will invest in the web over investing in apps. AMP IMA video is a component that we released in this space, which basically allows you to have pre-rolled ads in video as well. Here's a demo of a test site deploying it. But yeah, basically, you can still have your pre-rolled ads as you would in any other video player, and still have that on an AMP page, and still be able to recognize revenue while being on an amazing user-first experience on an AMP page. So what I was talking about, carousel. The current carousel kind of provided you with some primitives of being able to execute different kinds of layouts. So for example, a product gallery as well as a homepage carousel, but it didn't really think about all the business needs that a carousel needs to solve, and which is why we're rethinking the way AMP carousel works, and we're going to have 2 different carousel components that will cater to all of these use cases, such as having a news gallery of pictures, a homepage carousel where you can have the different ads, the different discounts or sales, etc., going on in a business, as well as a product gallery, so your users can really get a great insight into what the product has to offer, as well as related lists such as related articles, related products, etc., as well as using this to power other interesting experiences like recipes, for example. We also have a new component called AMP user location coming out soon. And the idea here is for a lot of industries, such as the auto industry or for the food delivery industry, being able to know exactly where the user is accessing this device from is very important. It allows you to reflect the correct prices, or to even say if the service is available or not. And that's where AMP user location comes in. It's a component that will help you understand exactly the latitude and the longitude of the user after getting their permission, of course, so that you can provide them the best, most correct service possible. And another component that we already had released, so coming back to that whole idea of progressive enhancement, is AMP experiment, where you could, which allowed you to do A/B testing with AMP pages. However, that component wasn't really written with understanding how A/B testing frameworks worked, whereas this one, we're really rethinking it from ground up, and we're working with A/B testing frameworks such as Optimizely and Oracle Maximizer to really help developers as well as marketing counterparts to these developers have the best experience while still being able to perform A/B testing on AMP pages, because we understand that is so important in being able to recognize what's important to a user on a page. The third principle is really making AMP indistinguishable from other web content. When you're on an AMP page, you shouldn't be able to say, hey, that's an AMP page because X, Y, Z. AMP is just a way of building a page, and you should be able to create the same interactive, rich experiences you would if if you weren't using the AMP framework. You just get performance kind of built in. So the first kind of new format that we've been exploring is stories. And sorry, let me go back. Stories is something that's really pushing the web forward. It's making sure that we're able to create really rich visual first content that the users can engage with, and reward with much more. Stories was announced at AmpConf a while ago, but we've been making iterative improvements in this space as well. We believe that stories don't just belong on mobile screens. You should be able to write the same story and have it render beautifully on a mobile screen or on a desktop, and that we've enabled you to do that as well, as you can see here. Initially, you would see this kind of a mobile cutout, which showed you that that was the story. But now, as long as you code it up correctly, you get a full body desktop experience as well. We're also making stories more actionable by providing more context into the story, such as having a sidebar with more information, a share button, as well as showing other attachments or other related stories that the user can then pursue, making stories just this really engaging but actionable format as well. So yeah, like I mentioned before, there's different ways of interacting with a story. So you can, for example, share it using those 3 dots over there, but you can also swipe up to learn more information, which could load another page or some other context that would help the user engage or act on that story. So for example, read an article or go buy a product that they've seen on a story on. Another format that we've been exploring is emails, really bringing AMP's interactivity, its richness to the email front and really innovating in that space. Here, I'm going to talk a lot about ecosystem support. The AMP for Email working group has been working with a lot of the email creators as well as email providers. When we initially talked about it at AmpConf, it was only Gmail supported it, but since then, we've seen really rapid feedback with mail.ru, Outlook, as well as Yahoo Email coming out in public support of this, as well as launching previews or just full-on AMP for Email experiences, which is great. It helps the user understand that email isn't just this static thing where they either get an annoying email that they dismiss or a passive email that they read and then ignore. It's a place of action. It's a place of really being able to reward the person creating this email with some form of either monetary or actionable reward. And we have a lot more coming in this space. For websites, we're kind of exploring stuff like payments and seeing how we can offer that support to e-commerce partners. We're also thinking about our CSS limit and how we can stick with the initial principle of having a hygienic CSS on the page, which is only putting on the page what you're going to use, but still going above that 50K limit if we feel like developers need it, as well as exploring how we can support publishers by really iterating on our currently available component called AMP Next Page, which helps you create an infinite reading experience. In AMP Stories, we're making these stories more interactive and more actionable by adding embeds that we talked about earlier, animations, reactions, as well as branching into different stories based on your actions. So this is great for polls, for example. So if a user wants to take a story in one direction, they can absolutely do so. We didn't talk about ads, but that's a format where we're continuing to innovate because we believe that AMP's lightness and its speed can really benefit the ads ecosystem. So we want more ad providers on board, but we also want the ads to become more capable as well as more performant. We recently did a whole bunch of work around making AMP ads lighter, and we're going to keep working on that so that you really feel that if you are deploying an AMP ad on your page, you're getting AMP's performance and you're seeing users reward that performance with greater action. And for AMP for Email, we're going to continue to actually make sure that the compatibility across the email providers I just talked about was consistent, so that if you're using AMP for Email, you get the same experience regardless of what email provider you have, as well as adding support for more components such as videos and other components where you feel that it can be really useful to have them on an email, so autocomplete being one of them. And this is all very quickly talking about what AMP does within its own ecosystem to really make sure AMP pages are great. But that's just half the job, right? It's not being a user-first content for AMP pages. Our motto is being a great user-first content format for all the web. And so a very large part of that is being a great citizen for the large and open web community. Part of this comes from just us writing components as contributors to the AMP project. You'll write a new component like AMP Carousel, true story, and you'll find that Scroll Snap, for example, behaves differently across different browsers, even though the spec is the same. And then we as the AMP project will work with all of these browsers, filing bugs, issues, et cetera, to make sure that the implementation as well as the spec is consistent across different browsers. That's part of our job. And the other part of our job is going back to these browsers and to the wider web community, giving feedback that we've recognized from working on the web as a framework, and making sure that that feedback is heard and then incorporated and amplified by other feedback as well. Malta wrote a great series of blog posts here where we talk about the lessons we've learned from AMP and like publicly committing to some of these insights, such as, for example, having lazy loading for AMP images and then reflecting that and having lazy loading for images in the web generally. And we've also, with AMP, we've worked on optimizing and delivering pixels really fast. And so we've given feedback that we've received from eye trading and making sure that AMP pages are performant back to the web community. And you'll see that in the innovation that has happened across the metrics that are important to the wider web community. We've moved from a first paint, which is just, yay, pixels were rendering on the screen, to something called the first contentful paint, which is there's significant amounts of content on the page now, down to the newest metric to be tracked, which is largest contentful paint, which basically tracks that the largest amount of the screen has been painted, and which means that the user is now going to find some value in this page, as opposed to 3 dots came onto the screen, which is what first paint reflected. We've been working with browsers to make sure that metrics like large contentful paint are recognized as real user-defined metrics as well. And we've continued our work in making sure that we have privacy-preserving pre-rendering, did it on my first go, that we can retain privacy-preserving pre-rendering on AMP pages and still show that it has huge win for our users. As you can see by this graph here, in 80% of cases when we pre-render an AMP page, we get the first viewport time down to 0 seconds. You can probably see it better on the side, screens on the side. But yeah, we'll get first viewport ready down to 0 seconds for 80% of AMP pages. On the other hand, if we choose to not pre-render the AMP page, the first viewport time actually goes all the way up to a second, which really shows the value of privacy-preserving pre-rendering, and that's feedback we're taking back to the browser community. And as a result of that, but also prior work that the browser community has been doing, we've seen signed exchanges become this really cognizant reality where they're a new web platform feature that enable you to have privacy-preserving pre-rendering. And we're really excited with the spec work that's already been happening on enabling this capability natively in all browsers. Chrome already supports this, and we're hopeful that other browsers will as well. And with AMP, we're recognizing the signed exchange work, and we support signed exchange technology in Google search. This means you get all the benefits of caching and pre-rendering while still getting your actual website's URL being reflected on the browser. So in no google.amp.cdn.ampproject.org/xyz, but you just get example.com or 1-800-Flowers in this case. This also makes stuff like cookies and analytics that much more easier to understand and handle because, again, it's just coming from your URL. Signed exchanges, Malta talked about it in his keynote. There's 2 ways of deploying it, one hard, one easy. The AMP packagers where you roll out your own signed exchange service, or if you're using Cloudflare as your CDN of choice, it's basically a bit flip, and you can deploy a signed exchange service immediately. We're also working with other frameworks like Next.js to really reflect all the speed that AMP has to offer. So AMP Toolbox Optimizer is this bundle that you can get from NPM that does a lot of what multiple AMP caches will do for you, which is server-side rendering AMP layouts, producing a valid AMP page, as well as optimizing AMP's runtime performance. The cache already does this, but if you're serving AMP from origin, you should still be able to get all those benefits, and you can with AMP Toolbox Optimizer. And what's great is if you're using Next or React as your framework of choice, you get all of AMP's lightning fast cache speed on your origin without having to do a lot of work, which I personally am in favor of. And with that, that's the quickest talk you've ever heard. Thank you.